All right.
All right, let's get to it.
I guess when we talk about sobriety, we focus on the person who had the alcohol problem, but less often do we focus on all the people who also are affected by this. I wanted to do this because Sophia will drop a comment or memory here and there, and I just go, oh wow, I don't even remember that. But we've never actually talked about it. So we live together now again, but we used to live together back then with a period when we didn't, when you said you couldn't be around me anymore.
Yeah, I guess for so long I never saw it as a problem because I also lived in New York City, and New York City has such a drinking culture, and it's like everything we do socially most of the time involves alcohol. And since you worked in the industry, I was like, it's just...
He's just being a professional. He's just getting that bag.
He's just getting that bag, building an empire. And I just assume, like, that's what they do. And you always... I feel like when you started bringing it up yourself, saying, like, oh, it's like I'm a functioning alcoholic. And, like, at first I would just kind of dismiss the comment, like, oh, yeah, whatever, like, you just drink a lot. But then the more you kept saying it, I was like, should I be concerned? And then, of course, I started noticing more and more, like, how, well, you, Kenya, and I have always bonded over food and drinks. I think it started going beyond that, where, like, it wasn't just when we were hanging out, bonding, whatever. It was just, like, you wanted to drink all the time. And so it went from, like, when we used to live together, like, you wanted to drink all the time, but our schedules didn't really sync up, and it was before the pandemic. So it wasn't like I felt pushed to drink, or like I was constantly seeing you drinking. Mm-hmm. So to me, it wasn't as, like, clear, what was going on. I just knew, like, you had like that kind of lifestyle that I was like, oh shit, because we used to laugh about this, but you would be coming in sometimes at like 5-6 a.m. in the morning from having stayed out late after work, and I'd be like stepping out to go to the gym. I think you went through a phase in 2018, I remember it very well, where Kenya, our sister, was also living with us then, where you were very sad. Mm-hmm. And instead of, like, seeking out help, like professional help or like help from us or anything, you've always known that we feed off of each other's energies. So instead, you kind of distanced yourself.
Uh-oh.
I know, every time I think about that time, I'm like, fuck. You distance yourself as to not affect us, negatively. But by doing that, we were like, oh shit, something's wrong. And we couldn't really tell because you didn't want to talk about it. But you would come home, like, always in a bad mood or always sad with these, like, raging whatever, the raging bitch beers that are, like, super high in alcohol percentage. And so every time I see those, I'm like... And you would text us in advance sometimes saying, like, oh, sorry if I'm too serious, or sorry if I, like, don't feel like hanging out, I'm having a day, or, like, I'm in a bad mood or not feeling well. And we just knew, like, all right, we just go to our room and, like, whatever. And I remember, like, you would come in, put, like, the beers in the fridge, and take a couple with you outside to just, like, sit there and cry, or I don't know if, like, you were smoking at the time. And so in that sense, like, I feel like it affected us even more because we didn't know, like, how bad it was internally for you, mentally and everything. And because we didn't know how to help. Because one, like, you wouldn't let us, because you can only help people who want to be helped or ask for help.
Sister.
But also because we're like, I don't know, is he, like, trying to stop drinking or what? Like, so I feel like during that time we were just, like, very disconnected, even though we lived together. But during that time, that's when I was, like, really doing well for myself, I guess. And, like, I had just gotten my first big girl, like, internship, and I was, like, killing it at the gym. I had, like, my good group of friends and just having, like, a very good time in my life. But I felt like I couldn't enjoy it or, like, celebrate it.
Oh, sister, I'm sorry.
Because I feel like the three of us, like, it's hard for us to, like, be happy or, like, celebrate something when we know that one of the others is not in a good place.
Mm-hmm.
So that's just, like, one of, like, the bad times, you know, that I feel like because of, like, your alcoholism and because of your, like, personal life that you had going on, it was just really hard. And I remember, like, the peak of it when before pandemic, right, when Kenny and I got to the point where we were scared of, like, you being alone, because we were like, you would like flirt with the idea of, like, suicide, and you would always say, like, oh, but I would never do it. I just, like, it pops in my head sometimes, or, like, whatever, but you're like, I would never. That's, like, you're like, that's, like, the coward way out, or whatever, you know, just all these things. And but, you know, people say, like, it's always the people that you least expect, or the people that say they would never do it, that end up doing it. So Kenya and I were, like, really concerned. I remember we reached out, or I think Emmy, one of your best friends, reached out to us, and we were all just like, we don't know what's happening in his head, and, like, how to help. We didn't know how to help. So I think at that time, that's when we were just, like, kind of just, like, constantly worried that, like, something like that would happen. And luckily it didn't. But yeah, I think, like, that was, like, the peak of it. And then I guess we felt like you got better, and like, you distanced yourself from certain people and whatnot. So we were like, all right, he's making progress, I guess. But then during the pandemic,
Plot twist.
Yeah, I feel like that's when we started spending a lot of time together. So Kenya and I went to Texas for a while, and then when we came back, it was like, it was still very restricted, but we were still going to each other's places a lot, right? We lived pretty close. And that's when I was like, holy shit, because I was working from home, and you would come over, and, like, no matter what time of day it was, you were always like, oh, let's have a drink. And Kenya always felt like like she had to join you so that you didn't drink alone. And she was also, that's when I think she was still on unemployment at that time, so it was like, oh, she had no excuse, you know. And I remember I was always like it's 2 p.m, I'm working, like I know I'm like in bed, or because that's when I was working like on my bed. And I'd be like, no, and you would just be like, ugh, boring, or like lame. And I think that's when I started like feeling that like shift in our relationship. Because like our whole lives, like I feel like, you know, our grandma calls us like uña y mugre. So we're like so close and like really complement each other well and whatever. And like you've always been like my number one fan, right, and supporter and whatever. And I think during that time it was like, because I didn't want to like live your lifestyle, you started becoming like rude or mean. And I didn't like that, because when it got to that point where like you were just dismissing me if I didn't want to drink. Even if I was done with work and I was like, no, you made it feel like kind of like, oh, okay, you're the boring sister, like get out of my sight, you know. And like I'm gonna hang out with Kenya because she's like trying to have fun. And so that's when I was like, okay, like now if I want to hang out with them, it's like to get drunk, right? And I think there were like 2 instances where I was like, I don't want to do that, because of course, you know, I drink and I enjoy going out, and like I get drunk sometimes and everything, but it's always like I have to be in the mood, or like I will have 2 drinks and like that's it. I'm not one to be like, let's keep drinking until like we can't drink anymore. And there was one time that like we hung out at your apartment with Alana and Kenya, and it was just like I felt like I was drinking and drinking and drinking just to like keep up with you guys. And I had the tolerance, so it wasn't like I was wilding out, but I was just sitting there. And I'm like, I'm just sitting here like taking all of this in, and you all were like dancing and all this stuff. And I remember I was like, I'm gonna go to sleep. And of course you're like, ugh, lame, whatever. And I went to sleep, and then I could just hear you all like acting all drunk. And I also like, I have never liked the way our sister gets when she drinks too much, and she knows this and everything. So the fact that like you were enabling her to also get to that level way more often than maybe she would want, but that I definitely like didn't want, I was like, fuck it. It was kind of like I saw you as a bad influence for our sister. So it was very conflicting, you know, because I care about both of you. So I was like, fuck. And at that point, I was already like, starting to feel like I don't want to be around this. And then the next time was like when you were helping us build some like furniture, or like assemble some furniture. And you were just being so mean. And that's when I think we started like actually like starting to argue in front of Kenya, but you like couldn't really see it, right? Because you were very dismissive and like, oh, okay, you're not with it, like bye. But I think, and I don't know if Chiquis was the one that, Kenya was the one that like told you, or you just like felt it, But I remember I had a conversation with her once. Because she and I were just like walking in the park. But like it was nice, you know, like to just spend time with her and walk with her in the park. And I was like, I can't do that with him. And we were like sitting down talking about you. And I was like, I don't know how to tell him because I love him, but I can't be around him. And I'm like, I like no longer enjoy spending time with him. And she, you know, she's so sweet, and she was like, I know, man, Chito, like, I get it, but like whatever. And I remember like after that it was like I distanced myself, and that's probably when you felt it, and maybe Kenya like made a comment about it. And that's when you like read a book, and we're listening to that podcast, and you told us like it was so random. You just showed up and you're like, oh, did I tell you guys like yesterday was like my last drink ever? We were like,
Simon.
we were like, cool. But at that time you had stopped trying to drink so many times before, and it was always like, ooh, I made it like 7 full days without drinking, and we'd celebrate with you and whatever, but it was always like no more than 2 weeks. So I think for the first 2 weeks we were like, I was kind of just waiting for like the day when you were like, never mind, I'm back, you know. And so at first I was very skeptical, and I'm like, sure, I'll go along with it. It's kind of like when people tell you, oh, I'm going on a diet, and you're like, here you go again, right? Like,
do you still feel that at any point?
With the drinking?
Or did you stop feeling that?
No, I think for a long time I did. I think it was time. Like, yeah, like for like 2 weeks, right? I was just like, this is bullshit. And then once it went beyond the 2 weeks, Kenny and I were like, oh shit. And I was like, I have no idea what fucking happened, because Kenny and I were like, something must have happened. Like, I was so sure that you probably had some like life-threatening situation, like a fight or something, or I don't know, just like a big scare, you know, that probably made you be like, holy shit, I almost died or something, and you stopped drinking. But every time we asked you, you're like, no, it's just something like switched in me and whatever. So we were like, Simon. But I'm like, all right, I respect it if he's actually going through with it, like. And obviously I was like, thank God, whatever that was, like, great. But it was also such an extreme switch that we didn't know how to act around you at first. And I know you were like, oh yeah, and you were talking about like this sort of enlightenment, you know, where you're like seeing life in a completely different way now, and like I understood it, but then I'm like, but I didn't, because you were like, I still want people to be able to like drink around me and not feel weird, and like still work with alcohol, like and not be tempted or whatever. And I was like, how could you not be tempted when all you did was drink for years? So even if you were like, no, I'm cool with y'all drinking, I tried to normalize it, and like I would get a mimosa or whatever at brunch, but I still felt weird like drinking in front of you.
I forget how weird it must be for people who maybe see my soap or something. They're like, what?
Like, yeah, even especially now, people that knew you back then, yeah. But I think, yeah, for a long time it was like, I knew that you were like quote unquote being good about it and like being very strong, right? But it was always like, how much willpower does he have? Because you would talk about like, it's not willpower, it's whatever, like, but I'm
it's
like,
not willpower, yeah.
Right, but I was like, no, like you do have to have willpower to quit just like that. And so I'm like, how much willpower does he have, like, you know, to... I still thought that, like, you could be tempted. Because,
like anything would happen.
Yeah, I think that was it. Like, because life was fine. But I'm like, the moment he goes through a heartbreak or has, like, a really bad time at work or goes through just, like, you know, any big fight or
Grey's Anatomy
something.
gets renewed for another season.
Yeah. And I was like, I was just scared of something like that happening. Because I'm like, that might be what breaks him. And, like, he ends up resorting back to alcohol. So it was, like, a while that I felt like that. Until, like, at some point I was like, oh, okay, I think, like, this is, you know, he's for real.
So it was gradual? There wasn't a point where you're like, oh, we're good? Because now I would think you think we're good, right? Or do you still...
No, now I think we're good. It's just like... It's gonna sound so weird, but since I'm so, like, present on social media and whatever, it's like, I tend to not want to post things for, like, people to see unless I'm serious about it. Or it's something that, like... that I'm like sticking through or you know I'm like, I would never post about a diet. Follow me along on my diet journey.
No, it's the accountability.
Right, because that creates some sort of accountability on like you sticking to it, but also like you're becoming this representation for people who want to either or who might be inspired by you or seek you out for guidance or whatever. So at that point it becomes more than just like a you thing, because you're trying to like share the process or like your story or whatever. And I feel like you wouldn't have done that unless you knew that like you were in a spot where you were so sure that you were done with that life. Like that is just part of your story.
I felt that too. I felt like it was kind of outing myself.
Right, yeah. It's like a
like,
coming out.
Oh, and if and if I go back, then everyone knows now.
Right. And like so I remember, I think it was probably around your 6-month anniversary that we got you like a little cupcake or something, and
no,
you
100 days.
About it. Oh, the first
yeah.
The first 100 days, yeah. That I was kind of like, once you start also like celebrating those milestones, and I feel like it just becomes a lot harder to go back, you know, because it's like, oh, I've made it this far. So that's when I started feeling like, oh, okay, we're good. But yeah, I guess it's just it was a very tough thing to get through, and it's crazy like that now we're like closer than ever, and you know, people see us and they're like, oh, your relationship is like so strong and you're so close. But a lot of these people don't know that in a sense, like, we almost broke up as siblings, you know, or we did. And that was probably like the one time in our whole lives that because of alcohol, we almost like lost each other. And that's why I feel like, I guess the way in which it still affects me today is just, I'm quickly able to spot these sort of behaviors in other people. But it's also hard for me to like say anything because I know Also, like, how they might take it, you know, if you make a comment or something. And it's also, like, it can be seen as, like, what the fuck, like, I'm just having a fun night and you're over here calling me an alcoholic, or... but I do sometimes, like, spot behaviors in people that I'm like, oh shit, like, I hope that they have it under control, because if they don't, like, you know, this might be a problem. But I also see that in myself, and our family has a history of, like, alcoholics, and and we all know, like, we've been, I mean, I have put myself in dangerous positions in the past because of, like, binge drinking. And of course it was, like, my crazy years, right, like, when I was in college and whatever. But when I think back to those days, I'm like, que pendeja, like, you know, you could have died, you could have whatever. And I think back to that, and I think back to, like, where you were at, like, the peak of it, and it's very hard because sometimes, like, I will want to have, like, a glass of wine at home, just, like, to chill, like, relax, but if I start doing it too often, I'm like I always I try to, like, catch myself, you know. I feel like, having experienced mom's all different kinds of addictions that she had, I just don't ever want to be in that position where, like, someone else in my family, like, or, like, a close friend or something, spots, like, behaviors in me where they're like, oh shit, do you have a problem? You know what I mean? So I think because of what I went through, I'm very mindful of, like, how I drink around people.
Well, thank you for sharing, sister.